Welcome back, folks. This will get us into chapter 5. And one of the central understandings of sociology and something that differentiates us from psychology is our interest in social groups. So to begin this, we want to talk about the paradox and this idea that the strength of weak ties is the people with whom we are the least connected who offer us the most opportunities. Strong and weak ties is a concept tied to a social theorist by the name of Granovetter. And what he's getting at is within our social networks, there are people with whom we have strong ties and others with whom we have weak ties. Interestingly, it is the weak ties that can provide new opportunities, such as meeting new people and finding new jobs. What I'd like you to do is to think about your own social network and which relationships would you consider to be strong ties and which would you consider to be weak ties? Also, why is it that weak ties provide more opportunities? When you think about strong and weak ties, primary relationships, family, that's a strong tie. Friendships are weak ties. Family keeps you tied more to the cultural values and norms of your family, but as you interact with other people outside of the family, you're introduced to new stuff and you change. So it's the weak ties that allow you to move from being very much tied to who you were socialized to be to becoming someone a little different than what the family thought you would be. Social groups form the building blocks of society and are essential to most social interaction. Georg Simmel argued that the key element in determining the social form of a group is the size of the group. And as the size increases, the shape of the group changes as well. Simmel emphasized that in particular, the differences between social relations in the dyad, or the group of two, and a triad group of three, they're different. The dyad is the most intimate form of social life because the two members are mutually dependent on each other. If one member leaves the group ceases to exist. But when you throw in that third person, the group can then begin to change. All you have to do is get two people in the group to agree, and the group makes a different decision. And Simmel felt that as groups grow, they become more stable. But the stability comes at the cost of intimacy. So, back to that third person. When a third person joins a dyad, that person can fulfill the role of, one, the mediator or the conflict resolver, two, the tertius gaudens, or the person who profits from disagreement from the others, or three, the divide et impera, or the divide and conquer, the individual who purposefully breaks up the other two. All of these are roles that can be played by the third person, and I'll be the first to tell you there's nothing worse than the person that plays the divide et impera role, the divide and conquer. I don't know if you've ever had a bad egg in a social relationship, somebody that took advantage of everyone else in the group without the group knowing it, and what ultimately over time, until the group figures it out, is that a person like this in a large group can begin to break down the social bonds that hold that group together, because all of a sudden People are questioning each other's motives, and somebody seems to not be holding up their end of the bargain in the friendship. So as group size increases, the number of possible relationships increases as well. In a group of three possible relationships exist, but in a group of 4, 6 possible relationships exist. The more relationships there are in a group, the more likely it is the group may be troubled by conflict or jealousy. You're going to start forming coalitions, and the coalitions are going to go against each other. And the larger depersonalized group setting is going to, by its nature, create a general sense of jealousy and distrust, which, of course, as we talked about earlier, is going to lead to conflict. Simmel and Cooley thought a lot about groups. For Simmel, he's looking at small groups, parties, and large groups. For Cooley, primary groups, secondary groups, and other group types, in groups, out groups, reference groups. But it's still the group where sociology makes its hay. We pay a lot of attention to the individual as well, but it's when we start to congregate into groups that our real potential can be harnessed and maximized. There's this interesting test called the Ash test, and it's a test of the influence of a social group and how the influence of a social group can get rational, reasonable individuals who are observing something that they know not to be true to agree with the group who is defining it as false. The Ash test is an experiment developed in the 1940s that shows how much people are influenced by the actions or norms of groups. So when you look at this and you say, which one is the shortest line? Well, when everybody looks at it, they can say, well, clearly line A is shorter than line B, and it's shorter than line C. But when the group says that line B is the shortest, a significant amount of people go along with line B being the shortest line, even though they know the answer is line A. So with this famous line study, Ash showed that if a majority of people agree on something, the minority will often go along, even if they don't agree. So the power of the group is very, very powerful. You should not underestimate what a group can get reasonable individuals to fall in line with. I mean, we don't have to look any further than the rise of the Third Reich and the Holocaust in Germany, or the rise of the American society and Manifest Destiny and the ethnic cleansing of Native Americans. We also need to talk about groups and moving from groups to networks. A social network is a set of relationships, a set of dyads held together by ties between individuals. That's where strong and weak ties start to come in. A tie is a set of stories that explains our relationship to other members in our network, while a narrative is the sum of the stories contained in this series of ties. New technologies that offer social networking like MySpace or Facebook have made traditional social networks even more complex. One advantage of these technologies is that it is relatively easy to see some social networks. One disadvantage is that it is difficult to see the importance of those ties. The rise of social networking in the United States has really come to dominate our lives in ways that we probably didn't understand were going to take shape when social networking really started to take off. But nevertheless, they're here, and we have to figure out what they mean to us and what they mean to how we define who we are and what type of society we're going to live in. This idea of embeddedness refers to the degree to which ties are reinforced through indirect paths within the social network. The more embedded a tie is, the stronger it is. In other words, the more direct or the more indirect paths you make to another person, the stronger the relationship will be. Mark Granovetter, who I talked about earlier, developed this concept of strong and weak ties to explain that relatively weak ties can actually be quite valuable because they are more likely to provide new opportunities than a strongly embedded tie. So if you don't have a lot of weak ties within your organization can stagnate and not change when it needs to change. It's the addition of these weak tie individuals that can then ultimately bring in new ideas and get the organization to change in ways that it might not have if the weak ties were not there. We need to be aware of a structural hole, and what that is a gap between network clusters or even between two people that would benefit from having the gap closed. An example of this could be your friend needs a job and your mom is the manager of the local supermarket. There is a structural hole between the two of them, but because you know them both, you can bridge that gap by mediating between the two parties. You become a weak tie that brings two individuals that would not have come together the ability to come together. This, of course, strong and weak ties leads into the concept of social capital. What social capital is the information, knowledge of people or ideas and connections that help individuals enter pre-existing networks or gain power in them. High amounts of social capital in a community generally means that the community is tightly knit and can come together to face challenges and make improvements. Many opinions exist about changes in social capital in the United States during the past 50 years or so. Some people perceive a decline in civic engagement. A social theorist named Putnam espoused this theory in the late 1990s, but some argue that we have less time to devote to traditional community activities, while others say the advent of the internet has created new ways of bringing people together. So, do we have more social capital or do we have less social capital? Not quite sure. Only time will tell.